Okay, this is everything you need to know about strength training and building muscle. I'm going to try to keep this video short and sweet and hopefully avoid rambling. So let's talk about why even bother strength training. Well, after the age of about 30, we tend to lose between 3 to 8% of our muscle mass per decade. As we get older, this just speeds up. This means by the age of 70 or 80, we could have lost up to half of our muscle mass. Now, with this loss of muscle mass also comes a loss of independence and a loss of ability to just do daily tasks, such as get out of a chair, go to the bathroom, play with your grandkids. Strength training can dramatically reduce this decline. If we're in our earlier years, our goal should be to build up a nice bank of muscle so that when this decline starts, we have a lot to lose before we get into that kind of danger territory. When we get into our older years, strength training can drastically reduce this decline. There are endless reasons we should be strength training, but just to name a few, we've got about a 15 to 25% reduction in all-cause mortality and early death. We've got reduced risk of osteoporosis, bone fractures. Strength training has even been shown to build bone density back. We've got reduction in sport injury risk. Some studies show on average a 68% reduction in sport injuries from those who strength train versus those who do not. Also, muscle acts like a big old sponge, soaking up blood glucose, improving insulin sensitivity, reducing your risk of type 2 diabetes. And of course, muscle building and strength training is the only way to achieve that toned, lean physique that you're after. Toned is just a word that is made up by the fitness industry. It is not a real thing. What it is you build muscle, you lose fat. One without the other is not going to give you that physique that you want. Just fat loss alone, you're not going to be able to achieve it. Muscle building is a non-negotiable. So hopefully we're all sold on why we should be strength training. Now let's talk about how we actually strength train. So if there's only one thing you take away from this video, I want you to remember this. The purpose of training is to stimulate adaptation. We're not in there training to get a sweat on, to get tired, to damage the muscle, to fatigue the muscle. It's to stimulate adaptation. So what do I mean by this? Our bodies are inherently lazy. They're not going to build energy costly muscle unless we give them an undeniable reason to. This is where strength training comes in. We go to the gym, we train hard, we lift heavy and close to our maximum effort, close to our point of failure. This is signaling to the body, I am not capable of completing this task, and you need to build more muscle and more strength so that the next time I come in and I try to complete this task, I am better able to do it. So if we look at this from the body's point of view, if you say, take a weight, let's say 50 kilo, let's say we're doing the bench press. If I could, like all out effort, get 14 reps, and let's say if I do 8, essentially what I'm doing is telling my body, great job, you're strong enough, you can do 8 reps, you could have done 14 reps, this was easy, don't bother building any more muscle. If, say, we take a heavier weight, let's say 60 kilo, that at an all out effort, you could only do 8 reps. Now, when we complete 7 reps or 8 reps, we're right at that point of failure. Our body goes, okay, this was really, really hard. I'm pretty much incapable of completing this task, or I'm right at my limits. So I better make sure I build strength, I build muscle, so that the next time I do this, I'm better able to handle it. That is the key thing when it comes to strength training. Must remember, we are here to stimulate adaptations. We're here to tell the body, you must get stronger. This leads us on to the question of what is muscular failure. So I just mentioned that we need to push close to this point of failure, but what exactly is it? So muscular failure is the point where we are trying our best to complete another repetition, but we physically cannot move the weight anymore. It is not, say, giving up because this burning sensation in our legs or in our arms is too much and we give up. Or it's not us getting tired. It is we're physically trying to do it and we can't. Now, we don't necessarily need to push always to exactly this point of failure, but we need to be within a couple of reps of it. Maybe 2 reps shy is kind of where we can get to. This is why activities like Pilates or super high repetition exercises don't contribute in the same way to muscle building and strength gain. They're simply not pushing you close enough to that true muscular failure. They're great in other regards for stability, muscular endurance, but they are not strength training. This leads us right on to another common misconception, that muscle damage and muscle soreness leads to muscle growth. This is outdated and untrue. If this were the case, then marathon runners who experience a huge amount of muscle damage when they run marathons would have massive legs, but they don't. We know that the lead driver of muscle growth is mechanical tension. This is applying a huge amount of force through your muscles when they're close to their point of failure, which loops us right back on to where we were, where you have to lift heavy, lift close to your point of failure. So let's talk about how do we effectively strength train. The good news is it's pretty simple. Try train each muscle group twice a week. Take each set close to your point of failure within a couple of reps of it. The amount of reps you do in a set doesn't really matter. Lower reps generally tend to lead more towards strength gains. So kind of anything under 5 reps tends to be more of a strength stimulus. A little bit higher reps, you kind of get a nice balance between strength and hypertrophy. That's why I think the sweet spot for reps is maybe between 4 and 8, 4 and 10, that kind of range, where you get a nice balance of hypertrophy gains as well as strength gains. Now, in terms of how many sets we do, I generally recommend between 2 and 3 per muscle group per session. Now, the reason I say this is because if we do more sets, we accumulate more fatigue, and the sets later on in the workout are less effective. However, we don't get a linear benefit in terms of the stimulus. So after, say, 1 set, we've maybe achieved 60% of the maximum stimulus we can get from that workout. After 2 sets, maybe we're up to 80, 85. 3 sets maybe brings us to 90. Anything more than that, we're accumulating fatigue at a faster rate than we're kind of benefiting our stimulus. So me personally, I do 2. I think you could get away with doing 1 really good set. Some people prefer 3. I think anything more than that is unnecessary and you're just accumulating fatigue. Now let's talk about tempo. Doesn't really matter. Don't overcomplicate it. Generally control the weight on the way down. We don't want to be, say, dropping the barbell down to our chest. Take at least 1 second on the way down. Try to lift fast and explosively. Don't bother with this super slow eccentric. It's really just going to lead to more muscle damage without necessarily a greater strength or muscle building stimulus. Maybe there's some room to play around with slower eccentrics, but for the average person, don't complicate it. Just control the weight and then explode out of the bottom of the movement. Nice and strong, powerful lift. Okay, when it comes to rest and recovery, rest for at least 1 minute between each set. The more rest, the better. I generally rest between kind of 3 and 4 minutes. The longer you rest, the more effective your second set is going to be. So the more rest you can give yourself, the better. I know people are crunched on time, so you could consider maybe doing a superset where you do, say, an exercise like a pull-up, which is working your back. And then while you're resting from that, you do an exercise like a press, which is working kind of your chest and your shoulders. And then back over to your pull-up. That will save you time while still allowing you a longer period of rest and recovery for that muscle group. Now, in terms of between sessions, I would take at least 1 day off between training the same muscle group. Right, so fair bit of information there. How do we put this all into a program? So this can all be accomplished by just maybe 30 to 60 minutes twice a week. I think you should focus on compound movements. These are ones that are involving multiple muscle groups. So you get way more bang for your buck as opposed to doing something like a bicep curl, which is really just working your biceps. If we do something like a row, it's working your entire back as well as your biceps. More bang for your buck. What you do in terms of exercises matters much less than how you do it. You can kind of just do whatever your exercises you want. Pick up something heavy that targets kind of various muscle groups in your body, different actions, but pick it up at a heavy weight that is challenging for you. If you have the best design program in the world, but you are not lifting heavy close to your limit, you're not going to make progress. Whereas someone on a very average program, maybe even only training 20, 30 minutes twice a week, if they train hard and effectively, they're going to be miles ahead of the person with the perfect program who doesn't train to that or close to that point of failure. Now, a common question is, should you take every set to failure? Now, in reality, the answer is no. If you are able to perfectly tell where your point of failure is. Me personally, I actually do take most of my sets to that point of failure. And the reason for this is because you don't really know where that point of failure is. So if I was to ask you, okay, how many set or reps do you think you could do with X weight? People way underestimate their ability. They could maybe even do twice as many reps as they think. I'm going to put in a clip here of me doing a set to failure, and you'll see just how slow it's moving at the end. That's really how hard we want to be pushing, or at least close to that level. Now, I don't necessarily recommend taking all your sets to failure, but I would say on the exercises where you safely can, take one set to failure, to complete failure, once a week or once every 2 weeks. This will kind of let you gauge your point of failure so that you can train to that level more effectively. So let's say I'm doing a bench press. Okay, terrible example because you can't really safely do that to failure. Let's say leg press. You can pretty safely do that to failure. You're in the machine that's going to catch the weight before it comes down on top of you. So I'm doing a leg press. Once a week I take that to all out failure. Say I get 10 reps. I now know that I should be training at least 8 reps. 8, 9, 10 is the reps I'm going for per my set to really maximize that stimulus. Now, how do we continue to make progress over time? So if training is effective, what was a heavy weight, what was near our max at the start of a training block isn't going to be as hard or near our point of failure by the end. So to continue progressing, we implement this principle called progressive overload. It's less actually of a principle and more of a result of effective training. It basically just means training slightly harder each time you go into the gym. So the way I implement this myself and with clients is I implement the double progression model. So we're going to pick a rep range. Let's just say between 6 and 8 reps. We're going to pick a weight that we can do somewhere in between that. Let's say 50 kilo. Every time I go into the gym, I'm trying to lift that weight to the top of that range. So I go in day 1, try to lift 50 kilo for 8 reps. Maybe I get 7. Next session I come in, again, I try to get 8 reps. Maybe this time I do get 8. The second I hit the top of that range, I'm going to increase the weight. So now let's say I'm up to 52.5 kilo. Now I come in, again, I'm going to try hit 8, but this time maybe I only get 6 reps. Next time 7, 8. Once I'm at the top of the range, weight increases, 55 kilo, we're back to the bottom. That way we continue to progress. So always working towards the top of that rep range. Once we get there, weight increases. This will make sure we don't ever get to the kind of a plateau in our training where we're just lifting the same weight over and over again. Now, we're not always going to be able to make progress. We're not always going to be able to add a rep or add a weight to the bar, but it's always the goal. We're always trying to just push that needle a little bit further out, a little bit further each session. Now, if we get to the stage where, say, we've gone through a couple of weeks of doing the same weight, the same reps, and we just can't make progress, we're in what we call a plateau. So then we could consider kind of switching up the exercise or maybe changing up the technique a little, just to give our body a little bit of a different stimulus. Okay, here's just an extra few little bits I just want to throw in at the end. So firstly, there are a number of diet considerations when it comes to kind of strength training and muscle building. Now, these are kind of outside the scope of today's video, but in general, we want a nice, healthy, balanced diet. We want one that is high in protein. And remember that muscle requires abundance. So if we were in a really strict calorie deficit, it is going to be a lot harder to build muscle because your muscles require energy to be built. Another point I want to discuss is delayed onset muscle soreness. So when we first start going to the gym, we will often experience a lot of soreness after we train. This is completely normal. You're not injured, you're not weird. This is a completely normal thing. As we get more used to training, these effects will kind of wear off. This is not a signal of a good session. It doesn't mean if you're not sore, it wasn't a good session. It doesn't mean you're not going to build muscle. The muscle building will still go. Your body's just getting used to it. Obviously, when it comes to any exercise, always warm up well and lift with good technique. If we're unsure on what good technique is, watch a video on YouTube, ask a personal trainer for a bit of advice, and just make sure we are executing our lifts correctly. Now, the last little point of today's video is I often get concerns about not getting too bulky. Now, this is not going to happen. It's just not. It takes so many years of consistent training to get to that level of muscle mass. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen accidentally. And besides, you're not entering a contract when you step in a gym. You're not saying, I am going to be in here every day for the rest of my life and I'm going to get as big as possible. If you've built the amount of muscle you want, you can always just stop. Or you can transition over to a more kind of strength-focused training program where you're not building as much muscle. So do not let that be an excuse for poor training. Always lift heavy, close to failure. That is the same regardless of sex, regardless of age. It is the only way to do it. In conclusion, strength training is one of the best things you can do for your long-term health, and it is the way to build that kind of lean, toned, aesthetic body that you're looking for. And remember, the purpose of training is to stimulate adaptation. It's not to go into the gym and do some arbitrary number of reps. It's stimulating adaptation. Now, all of this information is written down in the website linked in description. So if you would prefer to read it in that format, go down there and you can access it there. Thank you. And yeah.